Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Hey, Divas, you ready for another weekly roundup of Mormon news?
I am thrilled to be here. We have an absolutely action-packed week. We've got a lot to get to. I could not be more excited about this episode. One of the reasons is because about halfway through the week, I didn't have that many news articles, and I was like, gee whiz, I'm not seeing that much out there. But by the end of the week, it filled up very well. Did you have a good week, Al?
I sure did. It was very exciting to watch all the things going on. We got plenty of news to cover from all aspects of Mormonism, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Absolutely. The purpose of this podcast is to see what's going on out there in the world of Mormonism. We're going to be, some of the things you can look forward to in this episode is we're going to talk about the Black Menaces, which is a student group of BYU, and the LDS Church's response to the war in Ukraine. We're also going to discuss the contraception crisis at BYU. What? This is 2022? Contraception crisis? My goodness. And also how complaints always seem to be a precursor to revelation. And we're also going to reflect on our first listener feedback. Now, we have an email right now. It's MormonNewsRoundup@gmail.com. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're in the middle of building a website as well that is going to be launched very soon. And we're really looking forward to that. Now, some of the corrections I'd like to give from our episode 2, I kind of fact-checked myself and also Al. Talking about episode 2, and there's a couple corrections I want to talk about before we start this episode. And that's number 1 is the death rate. We discussed how in the 192nd General Conference of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, 90,000 people left the church for one reason or another. Either they died or they fell off the rolls, which people do when they reach 110 years old, by the way. That's when they fall off of the rolls, or they had their name membership withdrawn. And how the death rate didn't seem to match with the number of people leaving the church. And I said that the death rate was 1 out of 10,000. That's actually not quite correct. It's more like about 1 out of 100. That's a ballpark estimate. So about 1% of people die per year. And that's why the church's statistics from the last episode, I didn't really think really matched up with what one would expect with the death. So we also talked last episode about how I believe that the two primary indicators of the strength of the church is number 1, active proselyting force, and the church is at about 51,000 right now, and also the number of people paying tithing. And you said that where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. And I identified that as a parable that Jesus taught. That was incorrect. It's actually from the Sermon on the Mount.
Close. You still got the author right.
Somewhere, I just like this, tell people, it's in the Bible somewhere in the back. I don't know. And finally, we have another fact check, a couple of fact checks. I said that President Uchtdorf, I said I could not recall him ever speaking on LGBTQ issues because we were discussing President Oak's talk from the last General Conference, which was somewhat controversial and not necessarily well received among even faithful Latter-day Saints. It was somewhat of a troubling talk, I would say.
Yeah, he just kind of reiterated what he'd always said.
Yes. Obviously, a lot of people were hoping for something that was a little more progressive. And I said I couldn't remember the last time that Elder Uchtdorf spoke out on LGBTQ issues. So I went back and looked it up. And the last time that I could find was way back in 2010. And his statement, this was published in the Tribune, the article that I saw, was extremely bland. It said that we love our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, Latter-day Saints. Everyone needs to love everyone. We don't know the causes behind this, but we need to be generous and Christ-like. It was about as open and accommodating as a statement as you're going to see from a senior leader of the church.
Certainly. That's surprising. Wow.
Yeah. And, we're speculating here, but, President Uchtdorf, he was in the first presidency at one time. Before President Nelson came on board, he was a member of the first presidency. And I believe that he is only one of 2 apostles in the last 100 years that were part of the first presidency, but then were, demoted back to the regular quorum of the 12. I know that's technically, it's not a demotion because there's 15 apostles at the head of the church. And I guess, but he was moved down. And some people think that the reason for that is that he does not toe the line when it comes to the LGBTQ issues. I know that's speculation. There's nothing hard evidence of that, but you think that there's truth to that, or what do you think?
Oh, from my own personal opinion, when it comes to talking about Mr. Uchtdorf, I've met Dieter Uchtdorf once upon a time, and heck of a nice guy. Really a sweet man, and funny and charismatic. I mean, everything. He's just everything that a good leader espouses, right? Especially from the outside. He, but there's something about him and his attitude. I mean, coming from Europe, and a place where there's a lot more sex positivity in Europe than there seems to be in the Puritan settled United States. So it seems to me that he probably just doesn't quite fit in. That's my opinion.
Yeah, maybe that's the reason. We're all speculating here, but anyway, I did want to fact check that for myself. We also discussed how in the last General Conference how much more news could be made if the church continued to reveal if the prophets, the seers, and the revelators would reveal something and canonize it. And I said that the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, now known as the Community of Christ, their section of the Doctrine and Covenants, they keep adding to it. I said it went up to like 190. Actually, it only goes up to about 155 right now, but that's a fact check for myself. They're still revealing new revelations. It's been over 100 years now since the only true and living church upon the face of the earth has revealed a new revelation that has been canonized.
Oh my.
Yeah. So, that's some of the...
Yeah, we're a little behind.
yeah, that's to put it mildly. Yeah.
And the church has talked about things like the proclamation to the world on the family as being a revelation that is scripture and hangs up in everybody's household, but they haven't added that as another section of the Doctrine and Covenants.
No, they haven't. And I think, remember that if you want something to be canonized, it needs to be presented to the members for a sustaining vote.
Yeah.
You brought up that great article, I think it was last week, or it might have been the week before, where the sentiment for Generation Z and Millennial Latter-day Saints regarding LGBTQ, which is what the Proclamation of the Family is really addressing, is not really in accordance with what a lot of the proclamation says. So if they tried to bring that for a sustaining vote, it doesn't even pass.
You're right. I think that they would really struggle.
And that's probably the reason that it hasn't been canonized, among many others. So a couple of other things. We have a website. It's live in beta form. We purchased the domain just today. I put in the credit card. Hopefully it's going to be live by the time we go next week. But we are on Twitter. It's Mormon News Roundup. We are on email right now. It's MormonNewsRoundup@gmail.com. We're on Facebook. The couple of last things from the fact checking is I talked about how President Nelson in the last General Conference announced 17 new temples, and that brought his total of announced temples to 100, which is really unprecedented. And I gave a dollar figure for the amount that a temple costs. I said it was $10 million. I went back and tried to do some fact checking for myself to figure out how much are these temples costing. And a real baseline here for how much commercial real estate costs in the United States is really right around about $500 per square foot. That's a simple average for how much a commercial real estate venture costs. So let me ask you, Al, do you think that it would cost more or less than the average United States commercial real estate per square foot to make it?
The knee-jerk reaction that I would have would be, with the Mormon Church trying to put as much effort into these temples as possible. My knee-jerk reaction would say more, but I'm going to guess with less. And the reason why is because I think that the church also has a good tactic of saving money when it comes to real estate.
You very well might be the case, but you also have to realize that, average real estate, say a Best Buy or a McDonald's, not building those with lavish chandeliers and embroidered, Persian rugs and, Egyptian carpeting and things like that. It seems to me that the number would be even higher, but I guess we'll just have to agree to disagree. But how big do you think that the average temple is? Not a mini temple, the average temples that are being built now. How many square feet do you think it is?
Okay, so the big temples, they're about 3 stories high, and each story, thankfully, they're all pretty much blocks. So I mean, each story is equivalent. I guess each story is probably about 20,000 square feet. So I'm going to say 60,000 square feet.
Seems pretty reasonable. Let's just go with the commercial average. You think it's a little less? I think it's a little more, but let's just go with the commercial average of $500 per square feet. Well, times by the 60,000 square feet of an average temple, I actually think that the average temple might be around 70,000 square feet. The big ones, Salt Lake City, Washington, D.C., what's the one in California? The one that's
the San Diego.
Yes, San Diego. Those are all over 100,000 square feet, but those are the big ones. So let's just say conservatively 60,000 and the commercial average of $500 a square feet. How much does that make a temple building cost based on that math?
Let's see, 500 square feet times 6 plus a bunch of zeros, and you're up to 30 million.
30 million. So I said 10, but I think that is pretty low. You could be.
I think we're still conservative, even.
It could be more. So anyway, that's a fact check from the last time. And I just want to have everyone stay tuned for the end of this podcast for the results from President Nelson's forgiveness challenge. Now, he, in the 192nd General Conference, gave a forgiveness challenge, challenged everyone to forgive someone by Easter. And by the way, Al, happy Easter to you.
A happy Easter to you too.
Thank you so much. And at the end of this, we're going to talk about, Al challenged me. Well, we talked about which people I should forgive. We settled on Paul Dunn. I'm going to let you know what the results of that are at the end of this podcast. But that's everything from the housekeeping. Is there anything that I've left off?
I don't think so. Let's get to it.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so our first article here comes from Cache Valley Daily, and it was published on April 11th by Will Freewright, and it said, from Hungary and Slovakia to the Czech Republic and Iceland, Latter-day Saints are rapidly uniting to help refugees. And you're seeing missionary volunteers who are serving food to, this is from the Ukrainian crisis that's happening. We're on about day, I think it's 45 of the Russian invasion in the unprovoked, outrageous Russian invasion into Ukraine. And the church is having a response to that. And they don't have missionaries currently in Ukraine, but all of the refugees are getting pushed to the countries that are around Ukraine, such as Poland, Hungary, such as all of these other places. And the church is using some of their proselyting force, and they're redirecting some of their senior missionaries refugee crisis, which I think is absolutely great. In fact, the article says that in Hungary, the church found an NGO that is renting an entire hotel for refugees. And the church has said that they're going to be paying the costs for that hotel for these refugees. And this is something that I criticized the church on in the last episode. And I said the church needs to partner more with other outside organizations that are better suited to doing some of these incredible outreach programs, because the church is not really prepared for these type of refugee support. But there's a lot of NGOs that this is all that they do. So the fact that the church is doing, you know what this tells me, Al? This tells me that the church is listening to this podcast, and that they're taking our advice to heart. I think our message is really getting out there, Al.
Well, there's some of the good. Because, we do want to commend the church for doing the right thing and for looking after the people, even if they aren't of the faith, but for looking out for the people of the world.
I think that is tremendous. It really shows that I think that the church has the capability of doing these things. And maybe they just don't get the news coverage that they deserve, because this is coming from CacheValleyDaily.com. It's not picked up. It's not being picked up by the New York Times. It's not being picked up even by some of these the Associated Press.
Yeah, and this isn't even from like the church's KSL or Deseret News.
No, it's not. So I tip my hat off. Also, the next article talks about the next article, which is published by Todd Welch on April 8th, 2022, talks about how Latter-day Saints who help others, and that's baked into every congregation. And they talk about how Latter-day Saint Charities is helping refugees, again, from the Ukrainian crisis in Turkey,
Mhm.
and that the church continues to help in any way that they can for these refugees, since we're not really allowed to be, the church is not really allowed to be in Ukraine. It's too dangerous right now. But the church's humanitarian response in Ukraine is providing, a lot of hope. And you hear Bishop Kaze, who is the presiding bishop of the church, and he talked about, if you think of every ward as a humanitarian organization, that's powerful, he said. And the strength of the church is found in the individual members and in the ward organization, and that it's a magnificent organization. Now, the church, the President Nelson said he's, quote, the church is doing, quote, everything that we can, including providing at least $8 million in aid to multiple organizations. And this is across many countries, from Poland to Hungary to Iceland to all over the place. And we're talking about millions of dollars partnering with NGOs. It seems like the church is doing a lot here.
Yeah, that's that's a big chunk of change. It's certainly more than you and I have contributed. But
Yep.
we also don't have that kind of ability in our coffers.
That is absolutely true. And everyone, everyone should be looking for ways to contribute to those who are suffering in the Ukraine crisis.
That's
Now, I do want to say one thing, though, about the church's response to Ukraine,
Mhm.
and that's their initial statement about the invasion.
Yeah.
And if you read that initial statement about the invasion, if you think about the times past, the church has said that prophets are supposed to be very unpopular. They're supposed to speak truth to power. They're
Mhm.
supposed to rebuke evil and unrighteousness, and they are supposed to be the pillars of of what God's mouthpiece should be, and to rebuke those who need to be rebuked. Prophets are supposed to be unpopular and speak truth to power. But if
Yeah.
you read the Ukrainian statement that the church initially put out when this invasion went out,
Mhm.
it's pretty
Milk toast.
yeah, exactly.
Very
Milk toast.
non-political.
Yeah, it doesn't exactly rebuke the people like Samuel the Lamanite on the wall rebuked people for their evil and put his life on the line.
Yeah.
We're looking at a far cry from what the church could have done. Now, I'm gonna play the devil's advocate. I gave the church a lot of props for this
Yeah.
Ukrainian response. I think it's
Mhm.
been tremendous. They also,
Mhm.
Elder Uchtdorf went to Europe to minister among people as close as he could. So, he's from Europe. He's from the area. He remembers, he grew up in World War II. He
Yeah.
knows what it's like. They sent the right man for the job.
Mhm.
But if the church had just used some of the rhetoric that they had used in times past for the people in the LGBTQ community in that statement for Russia,
Mhm.
they called gays diabolical. They called them
Mhm.
evil. They called them satanic. They called
Mhm.
them so many things. And if you compare the rhetoric that the church has used in Ukraine to the rhetoric that they've used for LGBT members of the church, the contrast to me is pretty damning.
Wow. Yeah. Um, they certainly have no problem mincing words when it comes to the LGBTQ community, but when it comes to actual murderers and tyrants and invading forces, they're they seemed almost welcoming.
I
Well,
wouldn't go.
maybe that's that's a little
I
far.
wouldn't go. That's a little too far.
That's too
But
far. I
they,
apologize.
I wish that they could use some of that same rhetoric that they've reserved for little gay boys and girls in the
Yeah.
church,
Hmm.
for a genocidal, homicidal maniac.
Yeah.
The contrast to me speaks volumes. So
Yeah. The church did advocate for peace. They wanted this whole thing to be resolved. They wanted people to think of the people, and the church did, in its statement, advocate for peace, but I just don't think that it did enough to condemn the actions of the Russians.
But that sums it up exactly. That's my exact sentiment as well. Okay, so that's enough on the Ukraine. There's a couple of more aftermaths that are from the General Conference that that came out this week, and the next one is from Reddit that was released 5 days ago on Reddit, and it's a data dashboard, and it talks about somebody went through the church's numbers. And it says the countries with the highest members per congregation, and Chile is on top with 1,061 members per congregation. And this is based off the church's last statistics. So if you have a congregation, Al, that has 1,061 members in it, what does that tell you about that congregation?
Well, if it's an LDS congregation, it's going to need to have a very big ward house. Either that, or it's going to have a very low percentage of activity.
Right, because what the church does is once a congregation reaches a certain number of Melchizedek priesthood holders, they will split that congregation into multiple congregations. And I don't remember the exact number off of the top of my head, but I believe that you have to have, I don't know the exact number, but I believe it's somewhere around 40 active Melchizedek priesthood holders just to run a ward.
Yeah.
That's from the elders quorum, the bishopric, and all the rest of that. So you need to have around double that to be able to split a ward. So if you have 1,061 members and you do not have, I believe it's somewhere around 80 active Melchizedek priesthood holders, which is necessary to split the ward, what does that tell you about the activity rates there in Chile?
They've got to be pretty dismal.
Yeah.
Unless they're just not going after priesthood leaders or priesthood holders, or they're not looking for the men or the fathers. They're just going after wives and children. But that doesn't really ring true, since the church has always been about recruiting families as a whole family unit.
Well, there are more female members of the church than there are male, and there almost always have been.
True.
So, which is an amusing sentiment because, it's not amusing, but if you think about polygamy, it actually, I guess there's always been more active females than there have males. But, the church does not report the attendance rates. The church reports total members, but they don't report the attendance rates. And if you also think about Chile, a lot of these members that come and are converted in some of these South American countries, like if the top of this list is Panama, Uruguay, Colombia, Chile, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Mexico, Bolivia, Peru, Honduras, Venezuela. All of these countries have something very, very much in common, not just the fact that they're Spanish speaking, but what is the primary religion of all of those countries?
I believe it was Catholicism.
Right.
Yeah, the Catholic Church sent missionaries from Spain, which is really how they became Spanish speaking prevalently.
Right. So in the Catholic Church, there's a big tradition of, hey, I'm Catholic, but I only go to church once or twice a year. I only go on Easter. I only go on Christmas. And that's perfectly acceptable for a lot of Catholics to just be, it's kind of a faith-based religion. It's not a works-based. It's not, I have to be there every Sunday. It's not that I have to do X, Y, and Z. It's more of a mental thing.
Yeah. When it comes to Easter and Christmas, it seems like they really do give a strong effort to attend on those two holidays. But it seems also that the Catholic Church also understands that the world has to keep turning. So they don't typically seem to shame members from holding jobs that require them to work on Sundays.
Right. So when a lot of these formerly Catholic persons are baptized and into the church, they retain their old styles of worship, which is it's very casual. An average church, if you go to an average congregation, how many people do you think are in an average regular congregation, not a branch, on a given Sunday? In
an LDS congregation, well, shoot, I mean, when I was attending actively, I think it was 250 per ward, but I think that it's probably less, probably 100, 120.
I would think that the average number of attendants across the church would be around 150, because you would have about 200 that are considered themselves active, but not everybody will be there on Sunday, and some people are shut in. Yeah. But if you have 200 active members in a church, out of 1,100. I mean, the activity rates are very, very low. That's that's the only thing that I wanted to bring out in this particular article. Anything else on that one?
No, I think that it has been declining in activity rates for a long time, but it's I guess it's not surprising that you do have to dig a little deeper to find out what the actual activity rates are. But even though we can't get an excellent number, we can get in the ballpark, and I think we've come pretty close.
Yeah. Now, every single Sunday, the ward clerk or someone else goes through and counts the number of people that are attending for that particular Sunday.
Yeah.
And they roll those numbers up. They send them up to the stake, and then they send them to Salt Lake City. Those numbers are not released to the general public. However, someone in Great Britain released all of the attendance numbers for every single congregation in Great Britain, broken down by the number, by the week. And we do have those numbers. And the actual attendance rates in Great Britain were only in the teens. And some of these countries are even worse than that. So, it'd be nice if the church, like most churches, would report the attendance rate. That's the most important thing, not the total number of members, but they don't.
Yeah. As far as when I hear people talk in my own community, they've got a relative who's a ward clerk, and I hear time and time again, every time I hear it, they're like, "Oh yeah, my brother's a ward clerk, and he said that his attendance rate is way down." And of course, they don't give any specific numbers, and I don't expect them to. But just from what I hear, keeping my finger on the pulse of Mormonism around me, attendance rates down, activity rates are low.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Let's go on to the next article here, which is Religion Dispatches. This was released on April 13th, 2022 by Holly Welker. And it says, the title of the article is Always Pray to the Father. Mormon leader calls desire for knowledge of Heavenly Mother arrogant and unproductive. I thought this was a really interesting article because it points out that Joseph Smith, when he was 14-year-old, said that in one of his accounts of the first vision that he came across James 1:5 as an impetus for his religious conversion. And that James 1:5 says, quote, "If any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God that giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him," end quote. And that the idea of praying to God to ask for more knowledge is baked into the basic premise of Mormonism. In fact, at the end of the Book of Mormon, in Moroni chapter 10, there's so-called Moroni's Promise, which challenges the reader of the Book of Mormon to pray to God and ask for the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon, and it would be confirmed by the power of the Holy Ghost, and by the power of the Holy Ghost you shall know the truth of all things. So when Elder Dave Runland on the last General Conference on April 2nd, he said that, again, this was the concluding speaker of the women's session on Saturday evening. Runland devoted a little more than 300 words to explaining why it is, quote, arrogant and unproductive, end quote, to seek more information about Heavenly Mother. And this is part of his quote also. He said, "The Savior taught his disciples, always pray in the name of the Father in my name," end quote. "We follow this pattern and direct our worship to our Heavenly Father in the name of Jesus Christ and do not pray to Heavenly Mother," end quote. Is it also, before I ask you a question about this, remember that the church has released gospel topics essays, which are on the trickiest Mormon theological and historical points. There is a gospel topics essay on Heavenly Mother, and it is exceedingly short. All it says is, there is a Heavenly Mother, and we don't know anything more. Do you think that it is arrogant and unproductive to want to see information about the woman who apparently mother of all of our spirits?
I would have to take issue with the choice of words, the arrogance and unproductive. That to me sounds more like they're trying to shame people away from digging into something that they don't actually know anything about. But I wholeheartedly disagree. As you mentioned, this is as fundamental to Mormonism, almost as fundamental as the first article of faith. I mean, if they believe that there is a God, they believe that Jesus Christ is his son. They also, by contrasts have mentioned, Elizar Snowput and the hymn "Oh My Father." They've got a gospel topics essay about it. There is a heavenly mother, at least one heavenly mother. Now, is there multiple heavenly mothers? Is polygamy practiced in the celestial kingdom? DNC 132 would say so. But I think it's really, I think it's hypocritical to expect people to pray to know if the church is true, but don't pray to know anything about your heavenly mother.
Yes, well, that's a good point, Al. I wish there could be, the church would come up with a list to say, these are the things that you can pray about, and these are the things that you can't pray about.
Yeah.
Just let us all know what things that are off limits that we shouldn't even consider praying to God for, because the church teaches the importance of prayer, and saying, people get up every single fast and testimony meeting and say, I know the church is true. Why? Because I prayed about it.
Yeah.
I also think, think about the future of womandom. I'm not sure if that's a word for a Mormon woman in the eternities. She is supposed to end up like Heavenly Mother. And that means that she will have apparently no contact whatsoever with her offspring. So Heavenly Mother sent us to this earth to be tried and tested along with Heavenly Father, but said, you're on your own. Don't look to me. Don't ask me. Don't even ponder anything about me. I can't help you, and I won't help you.
Wow, Davies, that puts a whole different perspective on it, doesn't it? Because anybody that's my wife can't go a day without talking to her mother. My sisters, I'm sure, on the phone with my mom several times a day. It's just that it's the kind of the nature of most women, is that they talk to their mothers. They want to talk things through. They want some advice. They want someone to hear them. They want someone to cry with them. They want someone to laugh with them. And that's so to go and make a statement against it. Wow, that's a tough one for me to wrap my head around.
Well, just to
and what's unreasonable about it? But you make a very good point in that when it comes to learning about what you're supposed to do in the future, okay, let's follow the plan of salvation, that men are supposed to be gods, women are supposed to be goddesses, and what is your relationship to your children supposed to be? You're expected to just have no contact with them, to just worry and wonder about them until they come home?
That's what people are asking about. People are wondering this question in women's conference, especially women are asking this question. What is my role going to be in the eternities?
Yeah.
And if you look also at the Mormon endowment ceremony, you will note that, not to get too, I know this is a sensitive topic for some people, but every single person who was involved with the creation of this earth shares one thing in common, and that's they're all men. Apparently, Heavenly Mother, according to the most sacred and the highest holy ceremony in Mormonism, in the endowment, there's no women involved in the process whatsoever. So she was not involved with anything, making the earth, sending people here, not even spirits, because it was Elohim and Jehovah that did the spirit creation. Heavenly Mother was not there. So what is her role then? She has no contact with us. She wasn't involved with the planning. What is Heavenly Mother doing? And these are natural questions for people to have. And it seems to me that a church that is led by revelation would be able to, have more information. It seems like that the information that Joseph Smith brought forward was that the creme de la creme. Was that the end of all knowledge? It seems like in some ways that it is, and that, I think, is a disappointment for some members.
It certainly would be. I remember, being told that the way to learn how to behave as a man is go to the temple, and that's how you learn how to be a perfect father, how to be a perfect husband, how to be a perfect employee or employer. This is how you learn how to do it. Well, how do you learn how to be a heavenly mother? Are you supposed to go to the temple to learn that? Because there really isn't much. I mean, you get to see Eve's interactions, but you don't get to see very much interaction from Eve.
No, you
And
don't.
you don't get to see any interaction from Heavenly Mother.
No, in fact, now that I'm thinking about it, the Mormon endowment wouldn't pass the Bechdel test. Are you familiar with that one? The movie? Yeah, you're a big movie buff, right?
I am a big movie buff. Remind me what movie that's from.
The Bechdel test. The Bechdel test says that a Bechdel test is a movie has to pass the Bechdel test, meaning that a woman has to talk to another woman in the movie and not about a man. So, in other words, a woman has to have independent thoughts with other women that doesn't have anything to do with men. And I just realized the Mormon endowment ceremony does not pass that test. So.
At all, no.
Okay, let's go on. We got a lot to get through. This has been a big week, actually.
Sure
and
has.
our article here comes from By Common Consent.
Okay.
And this was published just a couple of days ago regarding how complaints seem to be a precursor to revelation. And this goes with our last article as well.
Sure does.
Remember, Moses took actions in the wilderness with the children of Israel. When Israel was attempting to escape from Pharaoh, they chastised Moses for putting them in a position where they would be recaptured. And Moses reassured them that, hey, the Lord will fight. The Lord is going to fight for you. They also murmured because they were hungry. And that's what brought forth the every morning the quails in the evening and the manna in the morning. Points out that there's many instances when revelation seems to be precursored. I don't know if that's a word, but seems to be a precursor to revelation seems to be complaints. Yeah. And this also reminds me of Black Sin, the priesthood ban and the temple ban. As complaints seem to get louder and louder in the 70s, it seems like the revelations were in response to that. And you can see that pattern throughout the scriptures. And that's one reason that when people seem to be complaining about Heavenly Mother or about LGBTQ issues, that seems like that's when things get done, is it's based upon complaints. You know, the Moses and they said, hey, we're thirsty. What this is in Exodus 17. We're thirsty, Moses. Please go back to the Lord. And he smites the rock. So God's prophets, God's plan seems to be predicated upon people complaining. So, you know, Dallin Oaks said that it is wrong to criticize leaders of the church, even if the criticism is true. But that does not, to me, divine pattern that revelation and change in God's kingdom seems to come out of the protests that people have. The more people that get united, the faster things get done.
Certainly, yeah. Even from Book of Mormon times, you've got the brother of Jared. Well, how are we supposed to, get across the seas? And, the Lord tells them, well, build these ships and, make the top like a saucer and the bottom like a saucer and put them together. Well, how are we going to breathe? And, he just keeps complaining and complaining and complaining. And the Lord hands him over and over and over again the answer. And then he says, well, how are we supposed to get light in there? And the Lord says, well, what do you think you ought to do? And he says, well, here, touch these rocks, make them glow, and we'll use that. And so, even, from the Book of Mormon, you get examples of complaint leads to revelation. It's a precursor. It's a forerunner. It's a catalyst for change and for action.
Yes, it is. And so that's why, they say, everyone just says, hey, stay in the boat, don't rock the boat, stay on the covenant path, just keep your eye on the prize. But doesn't seem to be what has happened in times past. It seems like the more that people want to get engaged and want to get answers, that seems like that's when answers are given.
That's right, and that's when change takes place. But the only people that don't want change are the ones that would rather just retrench and have the status quo stay the status quo.
Yeah.
But that doesn't benefit the people who are being marginalized or the people that are being sidelined throughout all that.
Hey everybody, it's D-Vase here. Thanks so much for listening to the Mormon News Roundup. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Allow me to explain. Anchor has the tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. It's everything that you need to make a podcast all in one place. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. So download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Our next article is from KUER.org, and it's on the Black Menaces. This was released on, this was released April 12th, 2022. And the title of the article is The Black Menaces TikTok Asks the Hard Questions to Provoke Change in BYU Student Life. So it's a group of BYU students has pushed the school into the public eye with their viral TikTok performances. In their videos, they ask BYU students questions like, does reverse racism exist? Does institutional racism exist? Is the Confederate flag racist? And it seems these responses seem to go viral. Why do you think that these Black Menaces are also the Black Menaces confronted Brad Wilcox? I think it was about a month and a half ago after he gave a very troubling talk to a youth in Alpine, Utah at a tri-state fireside. Why do you think that these folks are going viral, Al?
I really like the Black Menaces. I gotta say that right up front. I think that they're entertaining. I think that they ask really good questions. There's not really anything about them that I don't like. I think they go right to the heart of it too, and expose them. I mean, right there in the heart of Mormonism and on BYU campus, they go and talk to these kids who are being taught and have been taught, a lot of them their whole lives, about, this is where the church stands. This is what the church believes. This is what you're supposed to believe. And they confront them on that and say, okay, well, they've had several conversations with people, I'm sure, off the camera, where they say, well, this is what the church teaches. So then they go and get people to say it on camera, and they do. So,
some of the funniest ones that they've done is they said, okay, was this quote from a previous LDS prophet, or was it from a Confederate general?
Yeah.
And you can imagine if you try to drag out some of these old quotes, how well these things go. In fact, they've got 500,000 followers.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to some of the most popular Mormons in the world right now,
mm-hmm.
I don't even think that David Archuleta has that many followers. I mean, maybe does have more than that, but
mm-hmm.
still, these are definitely among the most popular Mormons around. And they, back when I was a BYU student,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have much background in a lot of these questions that these folks are asking.
Mm-hmm.
I would have failed just as miserably as a lot of these students did. I came from a very white area. I grew up in Utah.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in Utah County, which is 99% white. I still suffer from, white privilege and,
mm-hmm.
Being a very privileged individual. So even with being 40 years old now, I have a more nuanced approach, but I cannot blame any of these BYU students and many of their ridiculous responses, because if you put me back in that same time, I would fail just as bad.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there. We were probably at BYU around the same time. And if the Black Menaces had been around, I definitely would have. I would have hated them. I would have avoided them. I wouldn't want to end up on a camera with them for sure. But that's because there was such a load of cognitive dissonance within myself, and some of that I still have to root out. But I really applaud them and respect the work that they're doing.
Yeah, one of the leaders of it, he said, I'm hesitant to say that BYU, this is from the article, will actually make any change. However, I hope that they continue to work in active ways to educate the mass population about racism in the United States, how it has existed, how it does exist, how racism has been embedded in the LDS Church, how it's been perpetuated at BYU, and how all of these things in the same way how these have also affected homophobia and sexism. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, they're just very progressive, and what their desire is seems very reasonable. They want to see institutional change. They want to see the church move on from its very racist past, and that the same things that affected racism in the church's history, they want to see, especially with sexism and homophobia, they want to see those things put in the past. You'll notice in the article, they never say, "Oh, we want to see the church fail. We want to see, we want to see everybody leave the church, and we want to dance a little jig when we're done." They want to see positive institutional and personal change in the lives of Latter-day Saints, BYU, and the church in general. I think it's a really laudable goal.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that the real awesome part about it is they're taking the exact correct approach. They're They're not being antagonistic. They're just pointing it out for what it is. And I think in a woke culture, it's very easy to see where the problems lie.
Yeah, they're just asking very simple questions, and they're not doing it in a demeaning way. If you watch the video that we link in the show notes in the article, you'll see that they're just asking regular questions. They're not trying to, jab a finger in someone's eye or make someone look stupid. They're just asking what I think are very reasonable questions that a college student should be able to handle, or at least if they don't have the answer, to make them think deeply. So I really like their message. I really like what they've done, and I hope that I hope that what they're trying to achieve comes to pass.
I definitely wish them all the support and the success that they can get, because that's how, like our last article, that's how change occurs.
You bet. Now, staying on BYU, we also have an article this week which I could not believe, and this is from the BYU's own publication, the Daily Universe. That is the church-owned newspaper at BYU, and this was published on April 7th, 2022, from university staff, and it says Instagram page sparks outcry on DMBA's birth control coverage. Now, I full disclosure, I used to work. I worked for a long time at BYU for quite a few years. I think it was around. I was a full-time employee, paid employee for the church for almost 24 years, and most of that time was at BYU. So I'm pretty familiar with it. And the DMBA is the church's insurance program. It stands for Deseret Mutual Benefit Administrators, and it's the insurance for 16,000 church employees, which includes all of the general authorities, the BYU professors at BYU, Hawaii, Idaho, Utah. Also includes the CES employees, which are the ones who teach at the seminaries. So there's a lot of people who are part of that. And unbelievably, this article goes through and talks about how DMBA is denying basic birth control for church employees who are on DMBA. This sounds like it's coming out of a 1960s.
Yeah, there's been there's been a lot of controversy over the topic of birth control. Should insurance companies have to cover birth control? There's like Catholic organizations are strongly against birth control. A lot of fundamentalist Christian organizations are against birth control, and a lot of these places have actually started up their own insurance policies or insurance companies to give people, like, oh, well, you can have, they even advertise for it on the radio, that you can have your insurance that doesn't go against your beliefs, sort of thing. And so Deseret Mutual Benefits has kind of been the same. Well, it hasn't been openly advertised as such. In fact, it's kind of been a bit of a mystery or a secret that, hey, well, this is the church's health insurance provider. So people might be aware of it, but they're not necessarily terribly aware of the fact that, yeah, the church provides this insurance and provides it of itself, but also, the fact that it would go against birth control. The church doesn't openly teach against birth control. At least it hasn't for the last 50 years that I'm aware of.
The last 50 years, depending on how you define birth control. See, that's what the area, because is a morning after pill, is that birth control? Because so that's the issue here, is that the church used to have many statements that even said that condoms are no good. No, condoms, no. They've since backed off from those. But morning after pills could be considered abortions by some people. That's where the controversy is. So the DMBA's, this is from the article, DMBA's exclusionary policy is legal in part due to that landmark 2014 Supreme Court case, which was Burwell versus Hobby Lobby, in which the court ruled that under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, employers are not required to cover birth control if it contradicts the company's religious values. So the problem, I guess, for the church is that if you allow birth control coverage, we think that, well, that's fine. You can give people condoms, you can give people the birth control pills, you can give them IUDs, but that opens up the so-called morning after pills, which
Yeah.
the church, I don't think, is in favor of, because that could be considered an abortion.
Yeah, that is the gateway drug to abortion, isn't it?
Right. So what this article points out is that all of these women, because they cannot get the birth control, who are at BYU, they're having to go to Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
And it's just remarkable that Planned Parenthood, which if you talk to a lot of these local leaders, and I bet even if you talk to a lot of these general authorities, believe me, these people are not in favor of Planned Parenthood and what they are generally doing.
Oh, no, they're not.
But these women are having to go there. They said in the article, quote, "If we want to be pro-life, we have to support universal access to birth control. That's really how you're going to prevent unwanted pregnancies."
Yeah.
I mean, I cannot believe that we are in 2022 and hearing articles about how the church is not doing birth control.
We have a lot of willful ignorance in our enlightened modern age society, Dives, and I am really I'm really ashamed of us, because let me tell you, birth control pills, like the pill itself, actually fixes a lot more problems than just unwanted pregnancy. There's there's a lot of problems that several young women experience with their monthly period that the birth control pill actually helps. I mean, it can take care of excessive bleeding. It's an improved treatment for several things besides just, I'm not ready to get pregnant yet. It's so for the church to come out and refuse to cover any kind of birth control, it's really ignorant.
It's really outrageous.
Yeah.
And they say, they're saying, hey, some of these women are requiring birth control as a treatment in order to not be bedridden and miserable for her entire life, for just basic functioning.
Yeah.
And Springer, who they're quoting in the article, don't remember, this is not from some anti-Mormon trope. This is from the Daily Universe.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying, quote, is this actually reaching any policymakers? Do they even care? Probably not, is my guess, or else we'd see some change at this point. I hope someone will listen. This isn't Christ-like. This needs to change. It's okay to admit mistakes. This is a gospel of repentance.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm dumbfounded on this one. This is a real problem. So,
yeah, this one, it's just heartbreaking, is what it is. I don't know what to say. I mean, I know that abortion is a huge political topic, and there's a lot of people with arguments on both sides of the issue, and there's legitimate arguments to be made on both sides. But without going into the politics of it, when it comes to birth control, well, birth control is the foremost way to be able to avoid having to deal with abortion in any way. But that being said, it's not 100%, which, that's why there's a plan B. But, where people stand on plan B, that's also very controversial. It's, I guess, number one, I'm really concerned with the lives of the people who are alive right now. And, let's see what we can do to take care of them. And then, later on, we can worry about the life that's created. But
I agree. I'm very troubled by this, and I hope that this policy changes. I call on the church to change this. Fix if there's some type of a mistake or something like that's been made. I call on the church to fix this problem. This is unacceptable for any time, especially in 2022.
Yeah.
So, okay, we got 3 last articles to get through. We try to keep these podcasts to an hour. The next is from the section that was released on April 17th, and it was LDS Church's wealth spurs additional questions. Now, we covered this in last week's news.
Mm-hmm.
You brought it up, Al, that the church is the number one real estate by total amount of dollars, the number one holder of real estate in the United States by dollar amount, pushing almost $20 billion.
That's right.
Now, what this article asks, the follow-up question, we dissected that pretty well, I thought. And I asked you, how did the church come into the position of being number one? And one thing that this article brings out is something that we did not discuss last week, and that the church, one reason that they are able to climb to the top and be number one as a real estate holder in the United States is that they're tax exempt.
Mm-hmm.
All of those commercial properties and all of those other business properties, they have to pay taxes on that real estate, which makes it a lot harder to accumulate more real estate because property taxes are expensive.
Yes, they are.
And when the church does
sales
not,
tax is expensive.
sure is, sure is. When the church doesn't have to pay those property taxes, they can accumulate more and more wealth. They're not paying the taxes on what's in Ensign Peak.
Mhm.
That's the investment arm of the church, which the church admits to be 52 billion at a minimum, and the whistleblower says it's well over 100. They're not paying taxes on any of those, on any of that. They're not paying taxes on any of their real estate. They're hardly paying any taxes to anyone for anything. This is worse than Donald Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, should the church be paying what this article, let me ask you, Al, should the church be paying property taxes for all of this real estate?
Okay. When it comes to religion and real estate, this is where I stand on it. I think that all religions ought to be allowed to get tax write-offs, right?
Okay.
So I don't think that they should necessarily be tax exempt, but I think that just like you and I can get tax write-offs if we're making a charitable donation and we can prove as much to the IRS through receipts, etc. So charitable organizations and also by extension religions should be allowed to get tax write-offs for property that is used for charitable purposes or for religious purposes. Okay, so the temple grounds of Temple Square, sure, make it tax exempt. It's purely for religious purposes. Every ward building, sure, purely for religious purposes and charitable purposes. I know that they allow like blood drives and different events to go on there. They were allowing the Boy Scouts to meet there for a long time. I think that since they've gotten out of the Boy Scouts that they've stopped doing that. But prove it. Catholic cathedrals, let them have a tax exempt status on their on the properties that those cathedrals are sitting on. But when the church is going out and buying a home for a mission president, we're getting into some gray area. Is that part of the maintenance of the mission? Is it part of the humanitarian aid? Maybe if they're buying real estate or houses, residential properties, they need to be paying property taxes on those as part of the maintenance of the mission. I don't know. I mean, but definitely when it comes to like the church buying a shopping mall across the street from Temple Square, I don't think that ought to be tax exempt at all.
Now, I believe that is a for-profit venture, and I believe the church does pay taxes for those for-profit. The church bought that with their commercial real estate arm, so I believe that is not exempt. So we're talking mostly about chapels, temples, and things along those lines are exempt. But there's still a lot of money out there, and what this article also points out is it doesn't just interview Latter-day Saints; it interviews other faith. Say, well, if you start taxing our buildings, we can barely make it as we are. We'll fold up shop. We won't even have the hold worship services in our building if you tax us. If we have to pay regular property taxes, and some of these chapels and things, property taxes are high. It'd be very high for these buildings that are oftentimes very large and on spacious grounds. They say, we're going to put us out of business. So it seems like, hey, we don't want to put people out of business, but on the other hand, we don't want to give people a free ride. So it is a very difficult thing to try to fix. And a lawmaker also doesn't want to really touch this with a 10-foot pole. As soon as they say, hey, we're going to reduce the religious exemption so that some property taxes, they're not going to get reelected. So it's like, it's impossible.
Exactly. So that's a very fine line that you're walking between, eradicating the freedom of religion and, just trying to exercise some tax fairness.
Yeah, because the church is enjoying the LDS Church is enjoying those roads, those bridges, all of those things. You know what? Want to go pay is they help pay for all of those things, and the church is getting a free ride on all of these things. And they're not having to pay for any of it. So that doesn't seem very fair. There's, by the way.
Yeah, that's true.
So.
Because it's all it's all kind of a mess, isn't it? Our tax code is what are we 8 inches thick now? Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, we got so many volumes in that thing, it's ridiculous. But
Yeah.
yeah,
But good article.
excellent article.
I don't have the solution, and that's not the purpose of this podcast, is to try to convince people of my particular views.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's the way you approach it either, but it's just something to consider. What should the church be paying for all of their real estate holdings of $20 billion? Right now, the answer is that they're paying almost nothing. Is that fair? That's for a listener to decide.
Yeah.
We've got two last articles, and one of them was the oldest church, was the oldest leader. He actually didn't happen until April 14th, 2022. And this was from LDSdaily.com. President Nelson is now the oldest president of the church. Yeah. And he surpassed Gordon B. Hinckley, who was the president for most of the time when I was growing up. I was very fond of Gordon B. Hinckley. I went downtown to go see him preach, and at General Conference, stayed out to get my tickets early. I really enjoyed President Hinckley and his approach. Now, President Nelson is the oldest prophet. Now, just a real quick question for you. In times past, Al, it seems like God had called many prophets who were quite young. Think about Samuel in the Old Testament. Think about Joseph Smith. Think about Mormon in the Book of Mormon, became a prophet and led the armies when he was only 15 years old. Nephi was a young person. In fact, all of the original Quorum of the 12 in early church days were all pretty young. And the disciples that Jesus called the New Testament were pretty young. It seems like God, in times past, throughout all of the scriptures, called mostly young people to do his work as a general rule. And I think that one of the reasons is that young people are easy to mold. They you can impress your opinions on them, and they can last a lot longer if you're giving them an important message.
Yeah.
So what the average age of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles now, I read an article that says that the average age, I believe, is 78 years old, which if that's the average age, that means you're never going to have another LDS prophet who's under the age of 85.
I think that average is probably brought that low just by David Bednar.
Right. So,
but even he's what, 60 something?
He's getting up there. I'm not sure. You're probably right.
Yeah.
So you remember these prophets, when they are, and when you're calling a man who is at a minimum, usually the average age of a prophet now is 85 years old. These men are in cognitive decline. The champion chess players, I play a lot of chess. The champion chess players, they retire when they're 40 years old.
Yeah.
There's never anyone who's at the top of chess after they're about 36 years old. All of the champions are between the ages of 25 and 35 because that is peak mental health.
Yeah.
Why? It seems, far be it for me to question God, but why would God engineer a system that ensures that only people who are far past their prime mental acuity are going to lead his church? Remember the past presidents. We have Thomas Monson, who had dementia for a number of years as he ended his. We had President Kimball, President Benson, President Hunter. All of these men experienced serious cognitive decline towards the end of their life. No one finishes strong. So you're giving a person who has all of the keys. The only person on earth who has every key is the president of the church. And you're giving that to someone who right off the bat is not at the peak of their mental health.
Yeah, for sure. And, they have no problem putting the 70s into emeritus status.
Yeah.
But I do remember the last days of Ezra Taft Benson. Boy, the poor guy was drooling in General Conference. I mean, he was in rough shape. For a time there, Marion G. Romney and President Benson were out, and Gordon B. Hinckley was the second counselor, and the weight of the church fell on him.
Right. He was added, I believe, to the first presidency as an extra member of the first presidency, so that it could be four members of the first presidency as memory serves, because the top three were all out of commission.
Yeah.
That seems like an odd way to structure an organization.
Yeah, it's definitely doesn't surprise me that it's the way Brigham Young set it up. So prior to Brigham Young taking charge of the church and running off from Nauvoo, Joseph Smith, there was a lot of turnover, and in fact, like church leadership was a lot by common consent or by common vote. And so, like, they still do the sustaining votes today, just as they did back then. But it seemed like there was a lot more dissension. And I know in the days leading up to leaving Kirtland, they actually held a meeting in the temple trying to oust Joseph Smith as the president of the church. They did an election to say, look, we don't want him as the head anymore. Brigham Young, when he took charge, he's the one that said, well, I'm in charge and I'm in charge until I die. And there's nothing anybody can do about that. And furthermore, we're going to have it set up so that the quorum of the 12 apostles will be the pool from which the prophet is selected. And those people is a calling for life that can never be ousted unless unless they get excommunicated. And that's happened a handful of times since Brigham Young led everybody out west. There's only been a few people that have been in the quorum of the 12 apostles that got excommunicated. I believe one of them was Brigham Young's son.
I believe you mean John Taylor's son.
Oh, John Taylor's son. I'm sorry. You're right. I was mistaken.
Yes, John Taylor's son got excommunicated. There has been some excommunications. Brigham Young, it used to be when Joseph Smith set it up, it was the oldest member, it was the date of ordination was considered who was senior, who was oldest. But Brigham Young changed that to date of ordination because he did not want Orson Hyde to be the next president of the church.
Yeah.
He had a beef with Orson Hyde. If you read some of these Orson Hyde quotes, I think Brigham Young made a good decision because Orson Hyde was pretty far out there.
It would have been a very different church, Steve.
It really would have been. And if I'm telling you that I prefer Brigham Young over Orson Hyde, that is really saying something compared with what some of Brigham Young's statements. So, just let me say one more thing about this, and that's that the policy of exclusion in 2015 that banned gay children from being baptized, receiving the priesthood until they were 18 years old. That was enacted while Thomas was in mental decline with dementia. And President the rumor on the street is that President Nelson pushed, and Oakes as the number 2 and 3 pushed that over the finish line when Thomas Monson really would not have done that. If you think about Thomas Monson and his personal ethics and values, you really don't think that squares with the policy of exclusion. And
he was very much a gentle giant.
He was. And the reason that policy got pushed through is because of Nelson and Oakes, who we both know are, let's just say, not real LGBTQ friendly. Yeah. And because of the system is set up the way that it is, we got a bad policy that pretty much everyone now has realized that was not a good way to go, which is why it was repealed so fast. So if we had a different system in place for God's true mouthpiece on earth, we could avoid issues like this. That's all I'm trying to say.
For sure. Yeah. Okay. But you're right. There isn't a really good vetting system in to get like younger blood into the mix. So in perpetuity, until something changes, we are going to have a church that's led by the geriatrics.
Yes, indeed. The final message, the final article that I want to go through is every Easter and every Christmas, the First Presidency gives an Easter message, and they also give a First Presidency message. And this was published on KSL, Trent Tune, Deseret News also, April 13th, 2022. First Presidency celebrates life and mission of Jesus Christ with the 2022 Easter message. And they said, quote, "He is risen." This is a signed document. "He is risen with the angelic message of the first Easter. With feelings of worship and gratitude, we declare our witness that Jesus Christ has indeed risen." And they ended it also with, quote, "May the glorious significance of Easter attract all to follow Jesus Christ and to love one another as he taught in word and deed," end quote. And this First Presidency message comes less than 2 weeks after President Nelson specifically invited everyone to end a personal conflict by Easter 17th. And that's why I wanted to follow up with my last week's challenge. Now, last week's challenge was, hey, we came to realize that, hey, I've got a personal grudge against Paul Dunn. Now, one of the reasons that I did have a personal grudge against Paul Dunn is because of the armed forces. Now, I never saw any kind of the combat or action that Paul Dunn actually did. I know he told a lot of tall tales that showed that he had much more action than he really had, but I never even saw the kind of action that he really did have. So I think that those from the outside who try to criticize Paul Dunn for exaggerating war stories, I don't think that they really realize some of the pressure that is on veterans and their military service. It can become very easy to try to exaggerate these things. And so I do take a small personal umbrage that he exaggerated his war stories, that he really didn't play professional baseball and the other things. But I have tried to forgive him in my heart. And I think that that is a healthy thing for me to do, is to, let Paul Dunn go. The one question that I have for you on this last topic before we wrap things up is,
okay,
can a person, Paul Dunn was a very popular speaker. I remember listening to his tapes when I was a kid. His books were sold in LDS bookstores, including Deseret Book and other bookstores. Can the Spirit testify of the truthfulness of the church as an appendix to a story which didn't actually happen and is actually completely false?
The answer to this is going to be a tough answer, but
Okay.
I'm not going to shy away from it.
All right.
Okay, as the LDS Church identifies the Holy Ghost and the witness of the Spirit, the answer is yes, because it's an emotional response. It's not an actual like confirmation from deity that this is the truth. But what it is it's just a warm, fuzzy feeling that, well, this person told a very manipulative story that I bought into, and it sounded good. It felt good to, as I played out what he was saying in my head and visualizing it, I really got caught away with the spirit of it. And so the Spirit testified that it's a truth. And then you come to find out that the whole story was just made up. Yeah, that absolutely does happen. And it's a shame that it happens. But that's why it's important to do some fact checking. And so all the fact checking that we've done, or specifically that you've done, Diva, is between these episodes, making sure that we're on the up and up, and making sure that we're being honest and fair and accurate with people. That's why I feel like that's really important work, is we don't want to fall into that same category of, well, we're just making stuff up that feels good so that people will listen to it and they'll get a warm fuzzy, and then they'll follow us and give us a like and share us with their friends and neighbors. I would much rather this be about truth and accuracy than about feelings.
Well said. Well said. So I've completed President Nelson's challenge. I feel the better for it. And I think, as I said it in the last podcast, I said that it was a great challenge and that it was, quote, super duper. And I continue to say that it is. Now, we're going to wrap things up here. I would like to call on our listeners to please rate us on Spotify and iTunes, or wherever it is that you came across this. Now, we'll put out a call for co-hosts as well. If you feel like you want to ruminate on the great and spacious building with us, then send us an email to MormonNewsRoundup@gmail.com. That's with 2 N's, MormonNewsRoundup@gmail.com. And we would love to have you on the broadcast. Now, I'll received 2 inquiries about co-hosting, but both of those inquiries were by people who wanted to tell their story, not necessarily talk about the news. This isn't really a story podcast out there. There's a lot of people who are going to do a better job at telling Mormon stories than I am, or probably you are.
Yes. Case in point, Mormon stories. Contact John Dehlin. He's a very friendly guy.
Absolutely. They're more qualified. They can do it. And it's too saturated. I want to stick with what I know and what my passion is. And that's the news. That's why we're going to stay with that. We also are going to upload onto our Patreon. We're going to interview one another and put some of our backstory up there. So if you go to Patreon, you'll be able to unlock those interviews. I wanted to talk about the analytics so far of what we've had so far from listenership. And right now we have, as of week 3, we have about 30 subscribers / listeners, which was about what I expected. And most of those people are in the United States. Most of those people are men, and most of those people are in their 40s. So I guess it's no surprise that we're hitting the demographic of who we are, I suppose.
We found our people.
I guess so. Now, I want to end this podcast, and it's actually a slightly lengthy one, with our first feedback that we've received on our podcast. So, and I have not shared this with you yet, Al. So,
well, I'm waiting eager on this. I know that it's there, but I don't know what it is.
Okay, so here's what happened. So I was scrolling the web like I do, looking for news, because that's just who I am. And someone named Penguin31337 said, "I'm looking for a funny, lighthearted podcast that's spiritually uplifting." And he said, does someone have something like this? Something I can listen to on a Sunday that makes me laugh and smile and also feel the spirit. I prefer one that's LDS centric, but honestly, I'm open to a more generic podcast as well. Laugh out loud if there's nothing out there. I'll even take a funny, family-friendly podcast if it comes down to it. So let me ask you, Al, is this a family-friendly podcast?
But we sure try to keep it family-friendly. I know that there's some topics that are rather adult in nature. I mean, today's topic about birth control, that was a rather adult-themed one, but we really try to keep it clean and appropriate for all ages. Although I'm sure with a couple of middle-aged 40-year-old guys doing this podcast, kids are gonna get bored. But we try to keep it fun and funny.
Yeah. So can you laugh and smile? And is this LDS centric?
Try to be, yeah.
Okay. So I thought that this was perfect. This is exactly what this fellow was looking for. Okay. Yeah. So I sent him our episode. And I said, I sent him summary episode 2, LDS Church is #1 exclamation point in real estate ? Okay. So I sent him the episode and he listened to it. So we now have our first feedback, and he gave me some feedback, and he said, quote, "You clearly have some emotions you're working through. I don't believe you'll find true relief by mocking the beliefs of others, but I hope one day you can heal the pain you're so clearly going through."
Well, who isn't going through some emotions at some point in their lives, right?
I gave him a reply to that, and I said, "I'm not looking for relief, parentheses, from what? I'm also not in any pain, but thanks for listening. Please subscribe." So I have a question for you, Al.
Yeah.
Also, he did a final response. Let me give his final response. He would say, "I argue that ex-Mormons devoting hours of their life to make fun of Mormons isn't truly happy, and that you're not living a full life, and that you're wasting away, mocking others," which I thought was a very sad for our first feedback, but maybe I should have been prepared for that. Let me ask you this. Mm-hmm. Who did we mock?
I don't recall mocking anybody. I mean, we're not afraid to throw a jab at the church, obviously, but we try real hard not to mock people or their religious beliefs. I mean, if somebody's being ludicrous about something, then they might get some mockery, but especially somebody that's a public persona. If somebody's put themselves out there as a celebrity or in a public sphere, I mean, today we mentioned David Archuleta, but we didn't really even go into him, but he's also somebody who has put himself out there as a musician, and as he's also, put himself out there as a representative for the church in the past. I know he served a mission, and
sure did.
Yeah. So,
choir.
Yeah, you can certainly get. I wouldn't hold any punches with that when it comes to David Archuleta. I don't have any criticism for him presently. I don't know him at all, but he's put himself out there as a public persona, so he's opened himself up for it. But when it comes to personal, private people, we would never try to be mean to someone that doesn't want to be brought out into the public eye.
Absolutely. Now, I don't think we mocked anyone. Now, I listened to the last podcast. Mm-hmm. I did say that I thought that Ted Bundy's bishop had an off day. Remember?
Yeah. And I think that's fair.
Yeah. So if you want to be in the position, because remember, Ted Bundy committed about 10 murders before he was baptized in the church. But if you want to be the one who defends that bishop, and then go right ahead. Then please
Mhm.
go ahead and defend Ted Bundy's bishop, because I said that he had an off day, and oops, maybe he got that one wrong. That was the
Yeah.
extent of my mocking derision.
That's the best we can do. And furthermore, a bishop is a ordained representative of the church. So
I
yeah,
agree.
this is someone who is supposed to vet people who are going to be baptized, and they're supposed to use that gift of discernment.
It would have
So,
been nice. This seems like a good time to have used the gift of discernment, considering this person had 10 murders before he
yeah.
had the interview. Anyway,
So if you're going to take offense to that, then maybe this isn't for you. But we really, this is what this podcast is about. We want to address the issues of Mormonism, or the news that pertains to Mormondom, without becoming offensive. But I mean, shoot, I've heard a lot more offensive jokes sitting around family home evening with my TBM family, regarding the church. So
I
the
agree.
church can take it.
This reminds me, I want to go a little bit more deeper into this. I know we're reaching the end here, but it reminded me of the parable of the Good Samaritan. Let me just summarize that. The parable of the Good Samaritan, told in the Gospel of Luke. It's about a traveler who's implicitly understood to be Jewish, who's stripped of his clothing, beaten, left half dead along the side of the road. Another Jewish priest, then a Levite, comes by, but they both avoid the man. Finally, a Samaritan happens upon the traveler. Although Samaritans and Jews despise each other, the Samaritan helps the injured man. Jesus described as telling the parable in response to the question from the lawyer, "And who is my neighbor?" The conclusion is that the neighbor figure in the parable is the one who shows the mercy on the injured fellow, that is the man. So in this story, I'm the fellow member and the brother to Penguin 31. Did he say, "Hey, buddy, if you need any help, please reach out to me," and send me a private chat message with his phone number? I hope that you get the help. No, he didn't. I am the Jew. I am the fellow and brother in Christ that, according to him, is lying in the ditch. And what did he do? Did he say that he would help me? Absolutely not. He said, "I hope you get the help you need." The implicit thing is not from
I think
but
that's what the
someone
Levite.
else.
I think that's what the Levite did.
Right.
So I hope you get the help you need, and then walked off.
Exactly. I hope you're obviously in pain and in emotional turmoil and suffering. And I hope you get the pain or the help that you need. Oh, it's not going to be from me, but maybe from someone else. So, and he also said that we're a bunch of angry ex-Mormons. Did he even listen to the podcast? I said in episode 2 that I went to church that morning. I said I loved it. I said it was very spiritual. And I even praised the new General Relief Society president and Sister Browning in the primary in the primary presidency. I said that we both said that we found Elder Oaks talk a bit troubling, which was like a lot of members. And Al, you helped me accept President Nelson's conference forgiveness challenge. I said that it was a great challenge and that it was super duper. So my question is, what level of adulation for the LDS Church do you think can satisfy Penguin 31337? And he said that that's a rhetorical question. He said that we're spending hours of our life wasting it away. Yeah, we've released 3 hours of content so far. I guess it's 3 hours.
Yeah.
Honestly,
I mean, when it comes to the preparation of this, I could definitely dedicate more time to the preparation. So I'm thinking totally we've got 3 hours uploaded, maybe another, let's say another 2 hours throughout the week of preparation. So we're up to 9.
Yeah. I think this comes back to the idea that no one can mock anyone. Because if you remember what happens in the temple, it's that God will not be mocked.
That's
And
right.
I think that there is a trigger for people that thinks, well, if you disagree with someone, you're mocking them. So, I mean, this podcast is aiming for a lighthearted, respectful dialogue. And I reject the idea that it is wrong to criticize leaders of the church, even if the criticism is correct. Because I don't think that leaders are above reproach, that they're above criticism, and that they're somehow on a different plane. I think also what it goes down to is like Ted Bundy's bishop. You covenant not to speak evil of the Lord's anointed. Now, even though Ted Bundy's bishop got it wrong, you can't say anything about him because that would be evil speaking of the Lord's anointed. I don't like the idea that if a leader somehow gets something wrong, that they're on another plane of existence and that they're above criticism or reproach. You know, he also said that it was a waste of time. Well, is it a waste of time to talk about the Church of Jesus Christ? If that's a waste of time, then
Well, there's a lot of missionaries out there, 60,000 plus right now, around the world that are wasting a lot of time by that measure.
They sure are. And let me just a couple of other things, because this really got me going, but I'm glad that he gave me the feedback, because it has given me a chance to think about how I would approach feedback in the future. I think that there's only two ways that a lot of people say that you can do Mormonism. There's only two ways. Number one is that you're a dyed-in-the-wool, BYU Cougar football team loving, family home evening holding, praise to the man singing, big family, heterosexual, lots of kids, married in the temple, not single, never divorced, Saturday church toilet cleaning, testimony bearing, true believing member. That's the first way that you can interact with Mormonism.
Yeah.
And the only other way that you can react to Mormonism is that you're angry, you're deeply troubled, your countenance is fallen, you're in serious mental pain, you're working through struggles, you have negative feelings, you're a totally apostate, you're an anti-Mormon, lie-spewing blowhard. And there's only two ways. It's one or the other.
You know, traditionally speaking, Divas, that's been the case. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast, is because I believe that there's some gray area in between where we can find some happy medium. You don't have to, worship at God's one and only true football team on his one and only true football team playing campus. But we also don't have to be seething and frothing at the mouth about, how all that the church has done against you and your family. We can meet in the middle. Mr. Penguin, please, come and join us. We can talk. It's okay to have a different opinion. But, I'm not going to accuse you of being anything that you're not, and you don't need to accuse us of being things that we're not.
Right. I think it's the idea is if you don't fit the first mold as true blue, 100% ready to go, then you must be in the second category.
Yeah.
That's what he lists. There's only two ways to do it. And it's a dichotomy that, as you said, Al, I hope that this podcast can kind of break that down, that there's more than two ways to Mormon to have reflections on Joseph Smith. There's more than two ways to have a spiritual experience with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yeah, I would love for my own TBM family to listen to this podcast, and maybe they will someday if they're inclined to it. It's out there. If they listen to podcasts, I'll invite them to listen.
Amen, Al. Do you have anything else? I think that's a great sentiment to wrap up on.
I just want to give a shout out to Weird Alma, who's been really excellent to let us use his music. And we got a new song that we're going to play out the episode with today. It's The Semantics of Satan.
It's one of my favorite. I love all of Weird Alma's songs.
Yep. It's a little bit of a spoof on the Rolling Stones, the Sympathies to Satan. But this one, I think you'll enjoy it. So we'll see you next week.
Thanks a lot, Al. We'll see everybody later.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a being with no moral constraints. My number one goal is to hurt the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.